I am 73 years old and I have only truly lived for 13 of them. That is not modesty, that is mathematics. If you measure a life by breaths taken and meals eaten and sunrises witnessed, then yes, I have lived 73 years on this earth. But if you measure a life by moments when the heart is fully open, when the blood moves warm through the body, when you feel the weight of being alive and do not wish it were otherwise, then I have lived 13 years, maybe less. The rest was survival. And survival, I have learned, is not the same as living. I sit at my table now in the cabin I built with my own hands 50 years ago, and I look out the window toward the hollow where the waterfall is. I cannot see it from here. The forest is too thick, the ridgeline too high. But I know it is there 3 miles south through hemlock and rhododendron falling over limestone, the way it has fallen for 10,000 years. I know because I have walked to it every Thursday for 13 years, because behind that waterfall is a room, and in that room a woman taught a mountain to hold warmth. And that mountain taught me that I was not dead yet, though I had been trying very hard to be. This story is not about a young woman who built a room behind a waterfall. That is the story everyone tells. The preacher told it. The women at the church told it. Even the men in Pikeville, when they had whiskey enough to loosen their tongues, told it with a mix of admiration and disbelief. But that is not the true story. The true story is about an old man who forgot how to live and then remembered. About a man who spent 13 years turning to ice and 13 years thawing. About stone that can hold heat if you are patient enough to teach it, and about hearts that can do the same. It begins on the day I found smoke coming from inside the rock 13 years ago in the winter of 1884. But to understand that day, you have to go back further. You have to go back to the day my wife died and the day my son left, in the 8 years between his leaving and the smoke. You have to understand what frozen means before you can understand what it means to thaw. So let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah Harper died in the winter of 1871. She was 44 years old. I was 47. We had been married 25 years, and in those 25 years, she was the only person I ever truly talked to. Not the kind of talking you do to buy flour or sell ginseng or comment that the winter is cold. The other kind. The kind where you do not need to explain why you are saying what you are saying because the person listening already knows before you open your mouth. The kind where silence is not empty but full. Where you can sit across a table from someone for an hour without speaking, and it is the best conversation you have ever had. We built this cabin together in 1846, the year we married. I was 22, she was 22. We cut the white oak logs ourselves, notched them, stacked them, chinked the gaps with creek mud. The roof was oak shingles I split by hand. The floor was dirt for the first 10 years, then planks I milled from a fallen tulip poplar. The fireplace was river stone I hauled up from the creek bed, one stone at a time, 50 pounds each, 200 stones to build a chimney that would draw clean and not smoke the house. Sarah and I worked in silence most of those days. I would lift a log. She would guide the end into the notch. I would set a stone. She would pack the mud around it. No words needed. Our hands knew the work, and our hands knew each other, and that was language enough. We had one child, Samuel, born in 1860 when Sarah was 34 and I was 37. Sam was the kind of boy who talked easy and laughed easy and wanted to see what was beyond the ridgeline. He was like Sarah that way. I was not. I was the kind of man who talked when he had something that needed saying and was silent the rest of the time. I thought that was strength. I was wrong about that, but I would not learn how wrong until it was too late. When Sam was 10, I taught him to dig ginseng, showed him how to read the 3-leaf pattern against the forest floor, how to tell a 5-year root from a 10-year root by the rings on the neck, how to dig with a wooden paddle so you did not cut the hair roots where the value lived. He learned fast. He had his mother's quickness, her way of seeing a thing once and understanding it. We would walk the hollows together on Saturdays, him and me, looking for the pale green leaves in the dappled shade. Sometimes we would walk for hours without speaking, but it was the good kind of silence, the full kind. The kind that said, I am here with you, and that is enough. Then Sarah got sick. It was lung fever. It came in January of 1871, when the snow was 2 feet deep and the temperature had not been above freezing in 6 weeks. At first it was just a cough. Then the cough got wet. Then the breathing got hard. Then she could not get out of bed. I sat beside her for 3 weeks. I fed her broth with a wooden spoon I had carved years before, the same spoon I kept in my coat pocket, because a man who eats alone in the woods every day needs a spoon, and this one had worn smooth from use and fit the hand the way a good tool fits, without thinking, without adjusting. I held the spoon to her mouth. She opened her mouth and swallowed. Then she could not swallow as easy. Then the intervals between spoonfuls got longer. Then one morning I held the spoon to her lips, and her lips did not open. I sat there with the spoon in my hand, halfway between the bowl and her mouth, and I understood that she was gone. Not in the dramatic way you see in paintings, with the dying person saying something beautiful and meaningful with their last breath. Just gone. The way a candle goes out when the wax is used up. One second there is light, the next second there is not, and you are sitting in the dark with a candle that will never light again. I buried her on the hillside behind the cabin, under the oak tree where she liked to sit on summer evenings and watch the light change on the ridgeline. The light going from gold to rose to purple to dark. The same progression every evening, the same beauty, and Sarah watching it every evening as though she had never seen it before, which was, I understood only after she was gone, the mark of a person who was truly alive. The ability to see a thing you have seen 1,000 times and still find it worth watching. I carved the letter S into the bark of that oak. Then I went inside. I sat at the table. I looked at the empty chair across from me, the oak rocking chair I had made for Sarah in the 2nd year of our marriage, and I began to freeze. I did not call it freezing. I called it continuing. I continued to dig ginseng, continued to sell it in Pikeville, continued to eat and sleep and chop wood and patch the roof. But every action had the quality of a thing done by muscle and not by intention. Like a clock still running after the person who wound it has left the room. The mechanism works. The hands move. The hours pass. But the purpose, the reason the clock was built, the desire to know what time it is, and therefore to know that time matters, and therefore to know that the future matters, that was gone. The clock ran. The clock did not know why. Sam was 11 when his mother died. For 5 years, he and I lived in that cabin together, and I do not remember having a real conversation with him. Not once. He would ask me questions. Where should I set the trap line? Is this root old enough to dig? What time should I start the fire? And I would answer. But I never asked him questions. Never asked what he was thinking or what he wanted, or if he missed his mother the way I missed his mother. I thought silence was strength. I thought a boy needed to learn to stand on his own, needed to learn that the world is hard and does not care about your feelings, and the sooner you learn that, the better. I was wrong, but I did not know I was wrong until the morning he left. It was October of 1876. Sam was 16 years old. He stood in the doorway of the cabin with his pack on his back and his boots laced, and he said, "Pa, I am going west." I was sitting at the table. I looked at him. I did not speak. He waited. The silence between us was not the good kind. It was the empty kind, the kind where a father should be saying, "Do not go," or "Go well," or "I love you," or any of the 1,000 things a father says to a son who is leaving. But I said nothing, because the machinery of saying had been broken for 5 years, and I did not know how to fix it, and I did not know that it needed fixing, because I had been calling the brokenness strength, and strength sounded like it was enough. Sam waited for as long as a 16-year-old boy can wait for his father to speak. Speak, which is not very long, because 16-year-old boys believe the world is waiting for them, and waiting is a thing you do only when there is nothing better to do. He waited. The silence stretched. The silence became the answer. He turned and walked out the door. I heard his boots on the porch. I heard his boots on the trail. I heard the sound of his boots fade into the forest. And then I heard nothing. I sat at that table for 30 minutes after the sound of his footsteps was gone. I looked at the empty doorway. I looked at the chair where Sarah used to sit, and I understood in a way I had not let myself understand before that I had lost my wife to sickness. I could not stop, and I had lost my son to silence. I could have broken, but did not. I had done nothing to save either of them. Sam's old flintlock rifle still hung on the wall, the one that had been his grandfather's, the one I had taught him to shoot when he was 12. He had not taken it with him. I did not know if that meant he did not want it, or if he had left in too much of a hurry to remember it. I took it down from the wall. I cleaned it. I oiled the barrel. I wiped the stock, I checked the flint, then I hung it back on the wall. And every year on the day Sam left, I would take it down and do the same thing. Clean it, oil it, hang it back. Not because I expected Sam to come back and need it, not because the gun needed cleaning, which it did not, because a gun that is never fired needs no maintenance, but because the act of cleaning it was the only act I allowed myself that acknowledged the boy existed, that the absence was real, that something was gone and the space it left was not nothing. It was something, something heavy and specific and shaped exactly like a sun. The first year after Sam left, I told myself he would write. He was 16, old enough to know how to address an envelope, old enough to know his father would worry. I checked at the Pikeville store every Thursday when I sold my ginseng. No letter came. The second year, I stopped expecting one. The third year, I stopped checking. By the fourth year, the absence had become permanent. Not a wound anymore. A scar. The kind that aches when the weather changes, but otherwise you forget it is there. In the winter of 1884, years after Sam left, a man came through Pikeville heading west. He stopped at the store, bought supplies, mentioned he was going to Oregon Territory. I was there selling roots. The storekeeper said, "Ben here has a son out that way. You might cross paths." The man looked at me. "What is his name?" I opened my mouth to answer, and I realized I did not know if Sam was still using the name Harper, if he had changed it, if he had decided that the boy who left Tennessee was not the man who arrived in Oregon, if he had become someone else entirely, well, the way I had become someone else after Sarah died, a different person wearing the same skin. "Samuel Harper," I said, "but he might not be calling himself that anymore." The man nodded. He did not ask why a father would say such a thing about his own son. On the Cumberland Plateau, you learn not to ask. He left the next morning. I never saw him again. I do not know if he met Sam. I do not know if Sam was even in Oregon. But standing in that store, unable to say with certainty what my own son called himself, I understood something I had been avoiding for 4 years. I had not just lost Sam, I had erased him, cleaned him out of my life the way you clean a gun, methodically, carefully, until there was nothing left but the shape of what used to be there. That night I sat at my table alone. I thought about writing a letter, "Dear Sam." But what would I say after 4 years of nothing? "I'm sorry. That was true, but not enough. I miss you. That was also true and also not enough. Come home." But this cabin was not his home anymore. It had stopped being his home the day I let him walk out the door without a word. I did not write the letter. I went to bed. I woke the next morning and continued. 8 years passed this way. 8 years of the same routine. Wake at dawn, eat cornmeal, walk the hollows looking for ginseng, dig what I found, dry the roots, sell them in Pikeville on Thursdays, come home, eat, sleep, repeat. I spoke to the storekeeper when I sold my roots. I spoke to the man who bought them to ship east. I spoke to almost no one else. I had not had a real conversation with another human being since Sarah died. I had not wanted one. I was 60 years old in the winter of 1883. My beard had gone white. My hands were swollen at the knuckles from 40 years of digging in cold earth. My back hurt in the place where the spine meets the hips, the place that bears the weight of every stone you lift, in every root you dig, in every year you carry. I would wake in the mornings and my hands would not close all the way. I would have to work them open, like stiff hinges, flexing the fingers, curling them slowly into fists, then uncurling them. The pain was dull and constant, and lived in the joints and did not leave. I stood in front of the small mirror above the wash basin one morning and looked at my face. I saw an old man, white beard stained yellow at the corners from 50 years of tobacco, blue eyes that had been looking at the forest floor for so long, they noticed everything that was a root and most things that were not. Deep lines around the mouth, skin like weather-worn wood. My mother had died at 62, my father at 65. I was 60. I did not have many years left. And I thought, standing there looking at that old face, what have you done with them? You have survived. But surviving is not the same as living. That night I lay in bed and thought about Sam. He would be 24 now, a man. Did he have a wife? Did he have children? Did he ever think of me? Did he hate me for letting him go without a word? Did he understand that I had not known how to say the words, that the silence had not been strength, but cowardice, that I would give anything to have that morning back and say something? Anything, even the wrong thing, because any word would have been better than the silence. I did not write him a letter. I did not know where to send it. I did not know if he would want to receive it. I did not know how to start it after 8 years of nothing. So I did nothing, which is what I had been doing for 13 years. And the doing of nothing had become so normal, so much a part of the rhythm of my days that I did not even notice it was killing me. Then on a January afternoon in 1884, I found smoke coming from inside a mountain, and everything changed. I was walking a hollow 2 miles south of my cabin, following a creek down toward the Sequatchie River. It was cold, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache when you breathe, the kind of cold where the air is so dry it cracks the skin on your hands and makes them bleed. I had been digging ginseng since dawn, and my hands hurt, and my back hurt, and I was thinking about going home. Then I heard the waterfall. It was not loud, just a sound like applause in an empty room, like wind through wet oak leaves, something between music and machinery. I followed the sound down a steep slope through a forest of hemlock and rhododendron. The undergrowth was thick. I had to push through its sideways branches, scratching my face, my coat catching on the rhododendron's woody stems. I came out on the rocks beside a pool at the base of a waterfall. The falls were maybe 20 feet tall, 15 feet wide, not big enough to have a name, not big enough to matter to anyone except the few families scattered along the hollows who had passed it on deer trails and heard it from ridgelines and watched it freeze into a wall of white glass in January and swell into a roaring curtain in March. Water falling over limestone, the land doing what the land does. Then I saw the smoke. Not chimney smoke. There was no chimney, no house, no cabin, no structure visible anywhere in the hollow. Just smoke rising from the cliff face behind the waterfall, seeping from the rock as though the mountain itself were breathing. I stood there for a long time looking at it. I had lived 60 years on this plateau. I knew every kind of smoke. Leaf mold steaming after rain when the sun hit it, peat smoke from the bogs in the bottomland, fog rising from bat caves on cold mornings. But smoke from inside stone, behind a waterfall in January, I had never seen. I felt something I had not felt in 13 years. Curiosity. It was a strange feeling. Like an itch after a limb has been numb for so long, you forgot it was attached to you. I climbed the rocks beside the falls. Slowly. Carefully. The way a man climbs who knows that 60-year-old bones do not heal fast, and that the rocks are wet and mossy, and that one bad step means lying at the bottom of a hollow where no one will find you until spring, and maybe not then. I reached the edge of the curtain of water. I stepped through. The water hit my left shoulder and arm, cold enough to make my teeth clench, cold enough to take my breath. I stepped through to the other side and I saw her. A young woman, small, maybe 20, sitting beside a fire on a limestone ledge, sewing a tear in her dress by firelight. The waterfall falling 3 feet in front of her like a curtain drawn across a stage. Behind the waterfall was a room, not a cave, not a hole, a room, warm, noticeably surprisingly warm, and dry, and furnished with the spare efficiency of a place where every object had been earned and every surface had been considered. A stone hearth against the back wall, a sleeping platform of flat stones covered with hemlock boughs and a wool blanket, a cooking area with a flat stone griddle and a tin pot, a storage shelf of stacked flat stones along the south wall, a doorway gap at the south end of a dry stack wall that ran the full width of the ledge, 3 feet high, 2 feet thick, positioned 2 feet back from the edge to leave a gap between the wall and the waterfall where the mist could fall and drain without reaching the interior. I stood in the doorway gap and said nothing. I said nothing for a long time because I was a man who had spent 60 years learning that the first thing you say about a thing you do not understand is usually wrong. And because what I was looking at was a thing I did not understand. A woman, young enough to be my daughter, living behind a waterfall in a room she had built with her own hands out of stone and fire and silence in the dead of winter. Alone, I looked at the walls. The dry stack work was professional. Better than most cabin builders I knew. I looked at the hearth. The fireback was angled forward to throw heat into the room. I looked at the sleeping platform. Neat, the blanket folded, the hemlock boughs fresh. And I looked at the back wall. I walked to it. I pressed my palm against the limestone surface. It was warm. Not fire warm, not stove warm, body warm, the warmth of a living surface as though the cliff itself had a pulse. I held my hand there for a long time, longer than was normal, because the warmth reminded me of something I had forgotten or had tried to forget, and I needed time to bear the remembering. "The mountain is warming you," I said. The woman looked up from her sewing. Her eyes were dark blue, the kind of blue that looks black in low light. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has just said something true but incomplete. "I am warming the mountain," she said. "It is warming me back." I stood there with my hand on the warm stone and thought, this young woman is 20 years old, and she is warming a mountain. I am 60 years old, and I am letting the mountain go cold. I did not mean it literally. I still lit a fire in my cabin every night, but the other kind of fire, the kind you light because you want to live, not just because you are afraid of the cold. That fire I had let go out the day Sarah lay down and did not get up. "How long?" I finally asked. "Since October," she said. "You warm enough?" She placed her hand flat against the back wall. The limestone surface. She held it there the way you hold your hand against something you trust. "Feel," she said. I was still touching the wall. The stone was giving its heat to my palm. Steady, patient. The way stone gives, which is slowly over time, but completely. "What is your name?" I asked. "Eleanor Wade," she said. "People call me Ella." I nodded. I did not tell her my name. I turned and walked to the doorway. I stepped back through the curtain of water. The cold hit me again, but this time it felt different. Not like punishment, like waking up. I climbed down the rocks. I walked back through the hollow to my cabin, 3 miles through the forest in the fading light. I sat at the table alone, and for the first time in 13 years, I saw the truth plainly. Not empty in the way I had grown so accustomed to that I no longer notice, like a sound you have heard so long, it becomes silence. But empty in the way you notice when you have just been in a room that was full of fire and warmth in the presence of a person who was actually living, not just continuing, and whose living made the walls warm, and the air warm, and the stone itself warm with the heat of a life being chosen rather than endured. I thought about that young woman behind the waterfall, about the room she had built, about the mountain she was teaching to hold heat. And I thought, she is 21 years old and she is warming the mountain. I am 60 years old and I have been letting everything go cold for 13 years. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the warm stone, about the fire in that impossible room, about the woman sewing by firelight behind a curtain of falling water. 3 days later, I packed a sack with cornmeal and walked back to the waterfall. I did not plan to do this. I woke up that Thursday morning and thought, I will dig ginseng on the North Ridge today. But my feet did not go north. They went south, toward the hollow, toward the sound of water falling, toward the room behind the curtain. I climbed the rocks. I stepped through the water. I walked into the room and set the sack of cornmeal on the stone shelf beside her supplies. She looked at the sack. She looked at me. She did not ask why I had brought it. She did not thank me with words. She just nodded. And that nod said more than any thank you could have said. I sat down on the stone floor with my back against the warm wall. I drank a cup of water she offered me, cold and clean from the falls. I sat for 20 minutes without speaking. Then I stood and left. On the walk home, I realized what I had just done. I had sat in another person's home for 20 minutes. I had not done that in 13 years. Not since Sarah died. I had not wanted to. I had not known how to. But sitting in that room with my back against the warm stone and the sound of the waterfall 3 feet away and the fire crackling and the young woman sewing in the corner, I had felt something I had not felt in 13 years. Not happiness. Not joy. Those were too big, too far away. What I felt was simpler, smaller. But it was real. I felt warm, and the warmth was not just in the stone, it was in my chest, in the place where the heart is, in the place that had been frozen solid for 13 years. I did not understand it then. I would not understand it for a long time. But walking home through the forest that Thursday evening, with the light fading and the temperature dropping and my breath coming out in clouds, I made a decision without knowing I was making it. I would go back next Thursday. And the Thursday after that, and the Thursday after that, I did not know why. I only knew that for the first time in 13 years, I wanted to do something that was not about survival. I wanted to sit in that warm room. I wanted to feel my back against that stone. I wanted to hear that waterfall. I wanted to be near another person who was alive, truly alive in a way I had forgotten how to be. I did not know it yet, but that was the first day of the thaw. That was the day I stopped being ice and started very slowly to remember what it felt like to be warm. I went back the next Thursday. I did not tell myself I was going. I woke that morning and thought I will check the ginseng patches on the East Ridge. But when I walked out the door, my feet turned south, toward the hollow, toward the waterfall, toward the room where the stone held warmth. I brought a wool blanket. It was one I had found in the back of the chest at the foot of my bed, folded beneath other blankets I never used. I told myself I was bringing it because the woman might need it, because winter was not finished yet, and a person living behind a waterfall in January might need more than one blanket. But that was not the whole truth. The truth was that I wanted a reason to go back. I needed the excuse of usefulness to cover the fact that what I really wanted was to sit in that warm room again, to feel my back against that stone, to be near another person who was alive. I climbed the rocks. I stepped through the curtain. The water hit my shoulder, cold and sharp. I had learned to angle my body so it hit just the edge, not the full weight of the falls. Small things you learn when you do a thing more than once. Ella was sorting dried roots by the fire. Ginseng. Not much. Maybe a week's worth of digging. I could tell by looking that she did not know what she was doing. She had dug them too shallow, cut some of the hair roots, dried them too fast. They would sell, but not for much. I set the blanket on the stone shelf. She looked at it. She looked at me. She nodded. That was all. No words. No thank you. Just the nod that said, I see what you brought, and I understand why you brought it, and words would make it smaller than it is. I sat with my back against the warm wall. I drank the cup of water she offered. I sat for 20 minutes. Then I left. The next Thursday, I brought a canvas tarp, the kind you can pull across a doorway to block wind. I showed her how to rig it at the gap in the wall so she could close the room on the coldest nights. She watched, she learned. She did not ask questions she did not need to ask. The Thursday after that, I brought an iron poker for the fire. Her wooden stick was burning down to nothing. An iron poker lasts forever if you do not leave it in the coals. Week by week, I brought small things. A tin cup, a whetstone, a sack of cornmeal. Not charity, not pity. Something else. Something I did not have a name for yet. And week by week, I noticed changes. The wall had gained another course of flat stones. The joints were sealed with clay from the creek bank. The clay had been worked smooth, creating a surface that shed water instead of drinking it. The hearth had been rebuilt with larger stones, and the fireback was taller, now angled slightly forward so it threw heat into the room instead of letting it rise straight up the wall. And the back wall was getting warmer. This was the thing that held my attention, the way nothing had held it in 13 years. The back wall of the alcove, the rough limestone face that formed the rear boundary of Ella's room, was warming. Not by accident, not by magic, by physics so simple and so elegant that I, a man who had built his own cabin and his own chimney and his own root cellar, had never once thought of it. Every evening, Ella lit a fire and let it burn for 3 or 4 hours before sleeping. The heat from the fire radiated into the limestone. The limestone, hundreds of tons of it running back into the cliff for hundreds of feet, absorbed that heat. The stone held it the way a lake holds rain, not temporarily, permanently, or as close to permanently as makes no difference. After 2 weeks of evening fires, the surface temperature of the back wall had risen from 52 degrees to 58. After a month, it held at 60. The wall had become a radiator, pushing warmth into the small space all night, all day, regardless of whether the fire was burning. I stood with my hand on that wall one Thursday in late February and thought about my own cabin. Log walls chinked with mud. A stone chimney that drew well but whose heat went up and out into the sky the moment the fire died. Every morning in winter, I woke to a cold house and started over. 60 years of starting over every morning. And here was a woman, 21 years old, who had figured out in 4 months with no tools and no training and no help that the way to stay warm was not to fight the cold, but to teach the stone to remember the fire. I looked at her sitting by the hearth sorting roots. Small, lean, hands calloused from work. Face thinner than it had been in October but not hollow. The kind of thin that comes from working hard and eating enough, not from starving. And I thought, she is 21 years old and she is warming the mountain. I am 60 years old and I have been letting everything freeze for 13 years. That was the Thursday I realized something had changed in me. I was not just going to the waterfall anymore. I was looking forward to it. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were just the days between Thursdays. I would wake on Wednesday night thinking, tomorrow I go to the waterfall. Tomorrow I sit in the warm room. Tomorrow I see if the wall is warmer still. I was thinking about another person, wondering if she had enough firewood, if the chickens she had mentioned were laying, if the roof over Hangoamo was keeping the snow off the doorway gap. I was caring about someone for the first time in 13 years, and that scared me, because if I cared, I could lose. I had lost Sarah, I had lost Sam. I could not afford to lose anyone else. I did not have the strength for it, but I also could not stop going. My feet would not let me. Thursday would come, and I would think, I will not go this week. I will dig ginseng on the North Ridge. I will check the trap lines. I will do anything except walk 3 miles to a waterfall to sit in silence with a woman I barely know. And then my feet would turn south anyway. It was in early March when the snow was melting and the waterfall was starting to swell with runoff that I made a decision. I would teach her to dig ginseng properly. She needed money. I could see that in the worn clothes and the careful way she rationed cornmeal. I could give her money. But giving money is charity. Teaching her to earn money is respect. So on a Thursday in March, I said the first words I had said to her beyond hello and goodbye. Next week, I said, I will show you how to dig ginseng the right way. She looked at me for a long time. That look said, you are opening a door, thank you. The next Thursday, I brought my digging paddle and led her up the slope above the waterfall. I showed her how to read the 3-leaf pattern, how to distinguish a root that was 5 years old from one that was 10 by the rings on the neck where the stem met the ground, how to dig with a wooden paddle instead of a blade so you preserve the hair roots where the value lived, how to know when a patch had given enough and needed to be left alone for 3 years to recover. I taught by doing, not by speaking. I knelt. I dug. I lifted the root and placed it in her hand. She watched. She followed. She did not ask unnecessary questions. I realized as my hands moved through the familiar motions that I had done this before. Exactly this. I had taught Sam to dig ginseng 20 years ago. The same movements, the same patience, the same passing of knowledge from one pair of hands to another. And I understood, kneeling there on the hillside above the waterfall, that I was trying to fix what I had broken with Sam. Not erase it. You cannot erase the past, but learn from it. This time I was teaching with words, not just hands. This time I was patient. This time I was present. Ella dug a root. She held it up to show me. 5 years old. Clean dig. Hair roots intact. Get, I said. She smiled. Small, brief, real. And I felt something crack in my chest. Not break, crack. Like ice cracking in a creek in March. The kind of crack that means the thaw has started and cannot be stopped. Your son, she said. You taught him this. I stopped digging. I looked at the root in my hand. Yeah, I said. Where is he now? West, Oregon, I think. Oh, been 8 years. She did not ask why I had not heard from him. She did not ask what happened. She just nodded. And in that nod was understanding. The kind of understanding that does not need explanation. We dug in silence for another hour. Then we walked back to the waterfall. I helped her carry the roots. We hung them to dry in the warm back chamber of her room where the air was dry and still, and the temperature was constant. When I left that day, I walked home through the forest and thought about Sam, about the letter I had never written, about the words I had never said, and I thought maybe it is not too late, maybe I can still say them. But I did not write the letter. Not yet. I was not ready. The ice was cracking, but it had not melted. In late December, a week before Christmas, I arrived at the waterfall and the fire was out. That had never happened before. In all the months I had been coming, the fire had always been burning. Ella was always sitting beside it, sewing or sorting roots or cooking. But that day the hearth was cold. Gray ash. No smoke. And Ella was lying curled on the sleeping platform, her face pale, her hands clenched around the blanket. The room was not freezing. The back wall still held its stored heat, releasing it slowly into the space like a bank releasing savings. But the room was cooler than I had ever felt it, and the air had the quality of a place that was losing something it could not get back without help. I knelt beside the platform. I touched her forehead. Fever. Not dangerous yet, but the line between sick and dying is measured in degrees, and the degrees were dropping. I did not think. I moved. I knelt at the hearth and built a fire. My hands knew the work. They had known it for 50 years. Kindling first shaved thin with my knife, then small sticks dry hemlock, then larger wood oak and hickory from Ella's stack. The fire caught. The fire grew. The room began to remember what it was. I cooked cornmeal in the tin pot, thin, almost liquid, the kind of food you give someone whose body is spending everything it has on fighting and has nothing left for chewing. I sat beside Ella on the platform. I held the wooden spoon to her mouth, the same spoon I kept in my coat pocket, the same spoon I had used to feed Sarah. She opened her mouth, she swallowed, and I was back in my cabin 13 years ago, sitting beside Sarah's bed, feeding her the same way, spoonful by spoonful, watching her swallow, watching the swallowing become harder, watching the intervals between spoonfuls become longer until the intervals were everything and the spoonfuls were nothing. Until Sarah closed her eyes and did not open them. My hand stopped. The spoon was halfway between the pot and Ella's mouth. My arm locked, my chest locked. Everything in me that had been frozen for 13 years seized at once. The body remembers what the mind has buried. The body does not care about your schedule for grief. It surfaces when it surfaces, and there is nothing you can do but hold still and wait for it to pass. I sat there with the spoon frozen in the air, and I felt Sarah dying all over again. I felt the weight of the tulip poplar on Thomas Wade's chest. I felt every loss I had ever suffered pressing down on me at once, and I could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything except hold that spoon and wait for the wave to pass. Then Ella opened her mouth and waited. That small act, the opening of the mouth, the waiting, the trust that the spoon would come. It pulled me through because it gave me a task, and a task for a man like me who had survived 60 years and 13 winters of grief by doing the next thing that needed doing was the only thing stronger than pain. Pain stops you. A task starts you. I moved the spoon to her mouth. She swallowed. I dipped the spoon again. She swallowed again. I fed her until she fell asleep. Then I sat with my back against the warm wall, and I kept the fire alive through the night. Every hour I added wood. Every time I added wood, I looked at Ella breathing. I listened to the waterfall. And the three things, the fire and the breathing and the falling water, became a single sound. The sound of a room that was eaten. The sound of a life being held. And I was part of the holding. In the morning, the fever had broken. Ella woke. Her eyes were clear. She was weak, but she was alive. "You stayed," she said. Not a question, a fact. "Fire needed tending," I said. "I know," she said. "Thank you for tending the fire." We both knew she was not talking about the fire, and we both knew I was not going to acknowledge that she was not talking about the fire. That was our language, the language of the Cumberland Plateau, where care is expressed through action, where gratitude is expressed through acknowledgement, where love, if that is what this was, is expressed through the refusal to name it, because naming it would change it, and what it was did not need changing. Spring came in March. The snow melted. The waterfall swelled until it roared, and the mist filled the hollow like fog. Ella raised the front wall another foot to deflect the heavier spray. She planted a garden on the terrace above the cliff. Beans, squash, potatoes, seeds she had bought in Pikeville with the last of her $7. A 24-mile round trip for a handful of seeds that weighed less than a letter but carried more future than anything she had held since the day she left the cabin where her husband died. She built a chicken pen on the slope beside the waterfall, a wall of woven rhododendron branches, dense and interlocking, as effective as any fence. I brought her 2 laying hens in April. A gift, I said. though I framed it as a trade for the ginseng roots she had found and dried. The ginseng was worth maybe 30 cents. The hens were worth $1 each. Neither of us mentioned the math. In May, Ella told me about the bear. She told it the way she told everything, calmly, without drama. A black bear, maybe 200 pounds, scratching at the chicken pen in the middle of the night. She had gone out with a knife and a torch lit from the hearth and stood 15 feet from the bear and said in her normal voice, not shouting, not whispering, no. The bear looked at her. She looked back. 30 seconds passed. The bear turned and walked away. When she told me this, I thought she is 21 years old and she faced down a bear with a kitchen knife. I am 60 years old and I have been running from my own feelings for 13 years. Which one of us is braver? The next Thursday, I brought a sack of limestone and spent the afternoon helping her build a second wall around the chicken pen. Taller, thicker, with a flat stone gate that could be slid closed at night. We worked side by side, handing stones without asking, fitting them without discussing. The silence of two people who know what the work needs. It was the same silence Sarah and I had worked in 30 years ago when we built our cabin. The silence of shared purpose. The deepest intimacy that two people who work with their hands can share. Deeper than conversation. Deeper than confession. Because it requires no words and therefore no risk and therefore no defense and therefore no distance. While we worked, and I said, a bear does not quit because the wall is high. A bear quits because it gets tired. You build the wall thick enough to tire it out before it gets in. That is the only way. Ella stopped working. She looked at me. Are you talking about the bear, she said, or something else? I did not answer. I set the next stone. But I was not talking about the bear. I was talking about grief, about loss, about all the things that try to break into your heart and eat you alive. You cannot fight them off. You can only build walls, and you keep building until they get tired before you do. The bear came back 3 times in the month that followed. Each time it tried to get in. Each time it failed. The 4th time it did not come. In June, a thunderstorm dropped 3 inches of rain in 2 hours. The runoff overwhelmed the normal flow of the waterfall. The curtain of water became a solid wall, and behind the wall the surge found the ledge and poured over it. Brown muddy water flooded Ella's room to a depth of 6 inches before it found the gap and drained. The flood scattered her fire, soaked her platform, washed her cooking stones off the ledge and into the pool below. 20 minutes. That was all. 20 minutes to undo weeks of work, to turn a home back into a ledge, to remind a woman who had begun to feel safe that safety is a thing you build and the things you build can be destroyed. I was not there when it happened. I heard about it in Pikeville the next day. A farmer named Walker Morrison had been checking his cattle downstream and had noticed stones in the pool. Flat stones, smooth stones, arranged in a way that water does not arrange stones. He had followed the creek upstream. He had seen the mud streak on the rocks. He had looked up at the falls and seen through the thinning summer curtain the shadow of a stone wall. He had climbed. He had stepped through. He had found the room. He told his wife, Maggie. Maggie told the women at the church. The women told the preacher. I heard the news at the Pikeville store that Thursday morning. The storekeeper mentioned it the way you mention weather, casually, as general information. The Wade widow, he said, living behind a waterfall. Can you imagine? I said nothing. I picked up my ginseng payment and walked out. What I felt took me several hours to identify. It was not worry. It was not concern. It was anger. And the anger surprised me because I had not felt anger in 13 years, had not felt much of anything in 13 years. And the sudden arrival of it was like blood returning to a limb that has been numb so long you forgot it was attached to you. I was not angry at Walker Morrison. He was only curious. His curiosity was a natural response to an unnatural thing. I was angry because the world outside, the world of churches and opinions and people who believed they knew what was best for other people, was about to arrive at a place that had become part of my life. The waterfall room was not mine. It was Ella's. But it was the place where I went every Thursday and sat and drank water and said nothing and felt for 1 hour a week something that was not numbness. And they were going to take it, or try to, or tell her she could not live there, or tell her she needed to come back to town and live the way a widow was supposed to live. I walked to the waterfall, faster than I usually walked. My back hurt. My knees hurt. I did not care. I found Ella rebuilding, hands scraped raw from pulling stones out of the pool, clothes still damp, but building. The hearthstones already retrieved, the platform already drying, the fire already burning. The decision to stay had been made again, the way all important decisions must be made, not once but over and over every time the world tests them. The church women came before the preacher. Margaret Morrison was the first. She was 35 years old, married to Walker, mother of three. The kind of woman who confused propriety with goodness and believed that because her own life fit a particular shape, should fit that shape, and any life that did not was not different but wrong. She climbed the rocks on a Tuesday morning in July. I was not there, but Ella told me about it that Thursday, sitting by the fire, her voice calm and uninjured. Maggie had stepped through the curtain. She had stood in the room and looked at the walls and the hearth and the sleeping platform and the garden visible through the thin water and the chickens in their double-walled pen. And she had said, "Lord have mercy, you cannot live like this." Ella had looked at her and said, "I am living like this." Maggie carried the story back to Pikeville, not as a wonder, as a tragedy. That poor Wade widow living in a cave like an animal. Someone should do something. Someone should bring her back. Bring her to town. Bring her to a proper house. Bring her to a life that looked the way a life was supposed to look. The town divided. The church women stood on one side. They believed Ella needed rescue, needed to be brought to Pikeville, placed with a family given the life that a widow was supposed to have, a life defined by what she had lost rather than by what she had built. Ruth Brennan stood on the other side. Ruth was 55, widowed, running the dry goods counter beside the general store. She had buried a husband who drank himself to death at 42. She knew what it meant to start over. She knew what it cut. When the church women said Ella needed rescue, Ruth said loud enough for everyone in the store to hear, "I know women in this town who live in houses their husbands built and will not fix a door hinge on their own. Miss Wade built an entire wall. Who needs rescuing here?" I did not join the debate. I was not a man who spoke in stores, but the next time someone asked me about the woman behind the falls, I said 3 sentences. She is warm. She eats enough. She did not ask anybody's opinion. On the Cumberland Plateau, those 3 sentences were the most complete description of a sovereign human being that anyone needed to hear. But the talk continued. And talk on a small plateau where everyone knows everyone has weight. It gathers mass. It moves toward action. Reverend Whitfield came on a Tuesday in late July. He was young, maybe 30, clean-shaven, riding a bay mare. He wore a black coat and a white shirt and carried a Bible in his left hand and the reins in his right. Everything about him said he had come to do a thing he had already decided was necessary before he arrived. I was watching from the rhododendron thicket on the slope above the falls. I had positioned myself there at dawn, invisible, waiting, not to interfere, but to be present, the way a stone wall is present, not doing anything, just there, bearing weight if weight needed bearing. The preacher found Ella on the terrace above the falls, splitting kindling. The garden was green behind her. The bean vines climbed their poles. The squash leaves were broad and dark. The chickens clucked in their pen. The waterfall filled the hollow with its constant sound, making casual conversation difficult and sermons nearly impossible. I considered this a considerable advantage. "Mrs. Wade," the preacher said, "I am Reverend Whitfield from the church in Pikeville." "I know who you are," Ella said. "I have come because some of the women in the congregation are concerned about your situation." "My situation," Ella said. The word came back flatter than it went out, stripped of the preacher's concern and returned as a fact. "May I see where you live?" Ella studied him. Then she said, "Follow me." She led him down the rocks to the ledge. The preacher climbed poorly, grabbing branches, slipping twice. They reached the edge of the curtain. Ella stepped through without hesitation. The preacher hesitated, then stepped through. The water hit him full across the chest because he did not know to stay to the thin edge. He came through gasping, his Bible wet, his shirt soaked, and then he stopped. I could not see his face from my position in the thicket, but I did not need to. I had seen my own face the first time I entered that room. I knew what was on it. The room was beautiful. The waterfall cast moving patterns of green and gold light across the stone ceiling. The back wall radiated warmth. The floor was smooth limestone swept clean. The sleeping platform was neat. The fire was laid ready in the hearth. The sound of water filled the space. Constant, enveloping. Not silence and not noise, but the thing between them. The sound of the world doing what it does without effort. The preacher turned slowly, looking at everything. "Mrs. Wade," he said, and I could hear the prepared speech dying in his throat. "This is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Ella asked. "I expected misery." I appreciated his honesty. Honesty in a preacher was rarer than ginseng on a south-facing slope. "I expected to find a woman in need of rescue," he said. Ella was quiet for a moment. Then she sat on the stone beside the hearth and spoke. She told him about Thomas, about the tulip poplar, about the sound of her name spoken at a volume that meant certainty. She told him about selling the land and paying for the pine box and the preacher who spoke words about a man he did not know. She told him about walking south with $7 and a grief so heavy it had its own gravity. "I was not looking for shelter," she said. "I was looking for a place to stop existing. The waterfall found me first. When I stood here the first time and looked out through the water, I felt something I had not felt since the day Thomas died. Not happiness, not peace, just possibility. The possibility that tomorrow could be different from today. And that was enough. That was everything." The preacher walked to the back wall. He placed his palm against the limestone. The warmth met his skin. His hand stayed there the way every hand stays there, because the unexpected warmth of stone is a thing that demands attention. "Warmer than my parsonage," he said. Ella smiled. Small, brief, real. "The waterfall rescued me, Reverend Whitfield," she said. "I just built the walls." The preacher left. He climbed back up the rocks, wetter and quieter than he had come down. He rode his bay mare up the hollow trail and out of sight. I watched from the rhododendron with the satisfaction of a man who has witnessed an education. The preacher told his story in Pikeville. Not the story he had gone to find, but the story he had actually found. The story of a room behind a waterfall that was warmer than his own parsonage, built by a woman with no tools and no training and no help. The story traveled the hollows. Slowly, accurately, with respect. On the plateau, a story about a person was not entertainment. It was testimony. The argument faded, not because anyone won, but because everyone had corn to hoe and wood to chop and lives to maintain. The argument dissolved the way ice dissolves in a creek in March. Not all at once, but gradually, until one day it was gone and no one could remember exactly when it left. That Thursday evening, after Ella finished telling me about the preacher's visit, I sat for a long time. The fire crackled. The waterfall sang. The light moved on the ceiling the way it always moved. Green and gold. The light of the world filtered through water and given to stone. Then I stood to leave. At the doorway, I turned back. "You said you just built the walls," I said. "But the walls are the hardest part. Anyone can find a waterfall. Not everyone can build a wall." Ella looked at me. The look went on longer than looks usually go, like a note held by a good singer. Going on longer than you expect because the note has more in it than you thought, and the singer knows and is giving you time to hear it all. "You too, Benjamin," she said. "You are building too." I walked home in the dark, 3 miles through the forest. The words followed me like footsteps. "You are building too." Building what I had not laid a stone, had not raised a wall, had not done anything except show up every Thursday with a sack of something and sit for an hour and leave. That was not building. That was just being there. But being there, I would learn in the years that followed, was how the building starts. Being there is the foundation. Everything else is walls. I reached my cabin. I sat at the table. And I understood something had shifted in how I saw my own life. That night, for the first time in 13 years, I slept without dreaming of Sarah dying. I dreamed I was building something. With stone. Beside someone. The seasons turned. Winter to spring to summer to fall. 4 times over. 4 years of Thursdays. 4 years sounds like a simple thing when you say it fast. But those 4 years from 1884 to 1888 contained more living than the 13 years before them. They were built from small moments that accumulated the way snow accumulates, flake by flake, until the ground is covered and the world looks different. In the first of those years, Ella learned more than ginseng. I taught her to read the sky for weather, to know when a storm was coming by the way the birds flew, to tell good mushrooms from poison ones, to smoke venison into jerky that would last the winter, to repair a roof before the leak became a hole. She taught me things too, though she did not know she was teaching. She taught me that silence did not have to be empty, that you could sit beside another person for an hour without speaking, and it was not uncomfortable. It was companionship. She taught me that asking for help was not weakness. When her shoulder went out from lifting stones, she asked me to help rebuild the hearth. I helped. It was the first time in 13 years I had worked beside another person on something that mattered to them. In the second year, on a Thursday in October, Ella told me about Thomas. We were sitting by the fire sorting ginseng. The light was fading outside the waterfall. The room glowed with firelight and the last of the day coming through the water. He was a good man, she said. Not to me, to the fire. He talked about the fence he was going to build, about the child we were going to have. He talked about the future like it was a real place he could walk to. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "When the tree came down, I thought I would die too. I wanted to, but my body would not let me. It kept breathing, it kept walking. It brought me here." "And you built the walls," I said. "I built the walls," she said, "but the mountain held the warmth. I could not have done that part alone." I understood what she was saying. You can build walls, you can light fires, but some things you cannot do alone. You need the mountain, you need the stone. You need something solid that has been there longer than you and will be there after you are gone. Something patient enough to hold what you give it. I thought about Sarah, about the years I had spent trying to hold her memory by myself, holding it so tight it turned to ice in my hands. I had not understood that memory was like heat. You had to give it to something that could hold it. The stone, the earth, another person. In the third year, Ella fell through the ice on the creek in January. I was not there. She told me about it the next Thursday. She had been carrying water. The ice looked thick. It was not. She went through up to her waist. The cold hit her like a fist. She could not breathe, could not move. The water was 2 feet deep, but it might as well have been 20. The cold was that absolute. She pulled herself out, crawled back to the room, built the fire with hands that would not close, sat against the warm wall until feeling came back. "I thought about you," she said. "When I was in the water, I thought Benjamin will come Thursday. If I am not here, he will know something is wrong." I looked at her. She looked back. "You were not afraid?" I asked. "I was," she said, "but not of dying, of disappearing, of being gone and no one knowing. But you would have known. That made it different." I understood what she meant. Dying alone is one thing. Dying and having no one notice is another. The second one is worse. It means you were already gone before you stopped breathing. "I would have known," I said. In the fourth year, in the spring of 1888, when I was 64 years old, a letter came. The storekeeper in Pikeville handed me an envelope. The postmark said, Portland, Oregon. The handwriting leaned to the right at the same slant as Sarah's handwriting because Sam had learned his letters from his mother, and the mother's hand lives on in the son's hand, the way all handed-down things live on. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I walked home. 3 miles. I sat at the table. I placed the letter in front of me. I looked at it for 2 hours without opening it. I was afraid. Not of bad news, afraid of feeling. Afraid that opening the letter meant admitting that 12 years of silence had been a choice, my choice, and that the choice had been wrong. Afraid that opening it meant admitting that when Sam stood in the doorway and said, "I am going west," and waited for his father to speak, the silence that answered was not strength. It was cowardice. A father too frozen by grief to say the word that needed saying. Any word. Stay or go or I love you or come back when you are ready. Any word at all. Because any word was better than the silence. I opened it. The letter was short, 3 sentences. Sam was in Portland. He was a carpenter. He had a wife. He had a 2-year-old son, and he had named the boy Benjamin. "I named him after you, Pa," the letter said. "I do not know if you want to know, but I wanted you to." I read the letter 3 times through 3 sentences that contained 12 years of absence and the end of absence, and the beginning of something I did not have a name for. This particular thing, this combination of grief and gratitude and shame and joy, and the overwhelming awareness that time which I had treated as an enemy for 13 years was actually an ally. Because time had brought this letter to this table on this afternoon, and the letter said that somewhere in Oregon, a boy was named Benjamin, and the pre existed, and the meme existed, and therefore the connection existed. Connections like stone do not die. They just wait. I put the letter down. I stood up. I walked to the waterfall. 3 miles. Near dark. I climbed the rocks. I stepped through the curtain. I sat in Ella's room beside the fire. And for the first time in all the months and years that Ella had known me, I cried, not loudly. Not the way a dam breaks. The way water seeps through a rock wall. Slow, steady, from the deepest place. Tears running down my face while my expression barely changed. The face of a man of 64 who has held everything inside for so long that even the releasing is controlled. Ella did not ask. She placed a cup of water beside me. The same gesture I had made for her in the winter. She was sick. The gesture that said, I see you and I am here, and that is all I will do because that is all you need. She continued sorting beans. The small, dry sound of beans falling into the tin cup filled the room. The sound that said, the world is still here, the work is still here, you are not alone. After an hour, I wiped my face with my sleeve. I drank the water. I have a grandson, I said. His name is Benjamin. Then I stood and left. I wrote back that night. I sat at my table with paper and ink, and I wrote 4 sentences. Sam, I know now. I wanted to know. Your boy named Benjamin is the best thing I have heard in a long time. I am sorry I did not say so sooner. I crossed out the word sorry. Then I wrote it again. Then I left it. Some things need to be said even if they are too small, especially if they are too small, because the small words are the ones that matter. The ones that say, I see what I did wrong and I cannot fix it, but I can name it and the naming is all I have. I mailed the letter in Pikeville the next Thursday after sitting in the waterfall room for my usual hour. The Thursday after that, I brought a small piece of cherry wood, the best wood on the Cumberland, tight-grained, warm-colored, the kind of wood you use for things that matter because the wood itself is a statement of value. I sat beside Ella's fire and began to carve. My hands, which had not carved anything since the early years of my marriage, when I made Sarah a set of spoons, remembered the motions, with a knowledge that lives in the tendons and not in the brain. I carved for 3 hours that first day. Then I wrapped the piece in cloth and took it home. I carved a little each night for 2 weeks. The shape emerged slowly. A horse, small, pulling a cart, the kind a boy might push across a floor and make the sounds of wheels and hooves and imagine himself going somewhere. What are you making? Ella asked one Thursday when I brought the nearly finished piece to work on by her fire. A little horse and cart, I said. For who? For my grandson. Ella smiled, and I, holding the knife looking at the cherry wood, smiled too. 2 smiles in a room behind a waterfall. Small, real. The kind of smiles that are not performed for anyone but happen because the person smiling has forgotten for a moment to prevent it. When the horse was finished, I wrapped it carefully. I packed it in a box with wood shavings from my workshop floor. I took it to Pikeville and paid the postmaster 12 cents to send it to Portland, Oregon. The postmaster looked at the address. He looked at me. Sending something to your boy, he asked. To my grandson, I said. It was the first time I had said those words out loud to anyone except Ella. My grandson, not Sam's son, my grandson, a person connected to me by name and blood, and the slow, patient work of restoring a connection I had thought was lost. Sam wrote back, not often, 2 or 3 letters a year, but he wrote, and I answered every one. Each letter was a little longer than the one before. The sentences stretching out the way a road stretches out when you have been walking it long enough to trust that it goes somewhere. In his 3rd letter, Sam wrote about the horse. He said little Benjamin carried it everywhere, slept with it, talked to it, made it pull invisible loads across the floor of their house in Portland. He said the boy asked who made it, and Sam told him your grandfather made it, a man named Benjamin Harper, who lives in Tennessee. And the boy said, I am Benjamin too. And Sam wrote, yes, you are Benjamin too. I read that letter 5 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the oak chest with the others. Neither of us wrote the words sorry again. Neither wrote forgive. Those words belonged to a kind of conversation we would never have. Not because we could not, but because we did not need to. We said what needed saying by continuing to write. By showing up on the page the way I showed up at the waterfall every Thursday. Showing up was enough. Showing up was everything. The years continued. I grew older, not suddenly but steadily, the way a hillside erodes, invisible from day to day, but unmistakable from year to year. My steps slowed on the trail. I rested more often on the climb to the falls. The rocks that I had once climbed without thinking now required attention and care. There were mornings when I woke and my hands did not close all the way. The joints swollen from decades of digging in cold earth. I had to work them open like stiff hinges. The pain was always there now, in the knuckles, in the knees, in the small of the back. Not sharp, dull, persistent. The kind of pain that becomes a companion, that you wake with and sleep with and walk with until you forget what it was like to move without it. At 66, I said to Ella on a Thursday afternoon, "Next winter I will not make the climb." "Then I will come down," Ella said, without hesitation, without pause. The way you answer a question you have already answered in your mind long before it was asked. From that Thursday forward, Ella walked 3 miles to my cabin every week. She brought eggs, honey-dried ginseng. She stayed 1 hour. She cooked for me, checked the roof for leaks, split a week's worth of wood and stacked it by the door. The roles reversed. The giver became the receiver. And I, who had given my whole life, who had defined myself by providing and protecting and carrying the weight, had to learn the hardest thing I had ever learned. Harder than ginseng, harder than grief, harder than 13 years of frozen silence. I had to learn to sit in a chair while someone else worked for me. I had to learn that accepting help was not weakness but trust. And that trust was the thing I had not offered anyone since Sarah died and Sam left. I was learning at 66 and 67 and 68 that being alone and being strong were different things, and that the difference was the distance between surviving and living, and that the distance could be closed even at my age, even after all this time. Ella at 30 and 31 and 32 was not the woman who had walked south with $7 and a desire to stop existing. She was lean and strong and rooted the way a hemlock tree is rooted. Not in the shallow soil of the topsoil, but in the deep cracks of the bedrock, drawing sustenance from stone itself. She had become part of the plateau, not just living on it, part of it. The way a tree is part of the hillside it grows from, the way a spring is part of the aquifer that feeds it. Ruth Brennan became her friend in those years. Ruth would visit the waterfall once a month, climbing the rocks with careful deliberation, bringing news from town, buying Ella's ginseng and honey to sell at her counter. The two women would sit by the fire and talk, not about weather or crops, about the things women talk about when they trust each other, about loss and rebuilding, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, about the particular freedom that comes when you stop trying to fit the shape others expect and start living the shape you are. Ella became known in Pikeville, not as the poor widow, not as the woman who needed rescue, as Ella Wade, the woman behind the falls, the woman who built a room from stone and lived in it by choice, the woman whose ginseng was the best on the plateau and whose honey had a flavor you could not find anywhere else. People spoke of her with respect, with a kind of awe, the way you speak of someone who has done a thing you did not know was possible until you saw it done. And I, sitting in my cabin on those Thursday afternoons when Ella came to cook and split wood, felt something I had not felt since Sarah was alive. I felt proud, not of something I had done, of someone else, of Ella, of what she had built, of who she had become. In those 13 years, we never called each other family. We were not father and daughter. We were not related by blood or law, but we were connected in a way that mattered more than blood. We were connected by choice, by the decision made over and over, week after week, year after year, to show up, to sit by the fire, to share the silence, to hold the warmth, the bomb. 2 weeks ago on a Thursday, that felt like every other Thursday, and like no other Thursday, I made the climb one last time. My knees would not forgive me for it. My back complained for 3 days after. but I needed to see the room behind the waterfall one more time with my own eyes before I wrote these words. Ella was there as she always was. 34 years old now, hair pulled back, hands sorting ginseng with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times. The back wall was warm under my palm. 60 degrees, steady as stone. Benjamin, she said, not a question, just acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge the sun rising. I sat. We did not speak for 20 minutes. Then I said, I am writing it down. The story. Our story. She looked at me. It is not our story, it is yours. I just built the walls. You built more than walls, I said. She smiled. That small, brief, real smile. So did you. I wanted to tell her what she had given me. What those 13 years of Thursdays had meant. What it had meant to have a reason to walk 3 miles every week. To have a warm room to sit in. To have a person who saw me not as the man who had failed his wife and failed his son, but as someone who was still building, still trying. But I did not say any of that, because she already knew. The same way Sarah had known things without me saying them. The same way the stone knows the fire without being told. When I left, I turned at the doorway one last time. The room glowed green and gold with waterfall light. The fire crackled. The stone held its heat, and Ella sat beside the hearth alive warm, choosing every day to be both. I have not climbed back since. My body will not allow it, but I do not need to. The room exists. The stone is warm. Ella is there. That is enough. Now I am 73 years old. I sit at my table in the October light, and I write the last words of this story. I look out the window toward the hollow where the waterfall is. I cannot see it, but I know it is there. I place my hand on the arm of the chair beside me. Sarah's empty rocking chair. The oak rocking chair I made with my own hands 50 years ago. The chair that has been empty for 25 years. The wood is warm, not body warm, not fire warm, sun warm, the simplest warmth there is. The warmth that happens when light falls on a thing and the thing holds it. I do not see the empty chair anymore. I see the chair. Oak, solid, made by my own hands in a time when I built things because I believed in the future. Sarah is not in the chair. Sarah will never be in the chair again. That is the truth, and the truth has not changed. But my relationship to the truth has changed. The truth is the same. I am different. I can look at the chair now and see what it is instead of what it is not. I can see the wood instead of the absence, the craft instead of the loss, the warmth instead of the cold. And 3 miles south behind a waterfall that has no name, because it does not need one, a woman of 34 is placing her hand against a limestone wall. 60 degrees, steady, unchanged. The same temperature it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. The heat she has given the stone, and the stone has held, and the stone has given back. Night after night, year after year, the slow, patient exchange that requires nothing but consistency and rewards nothing but faith. That bargain held. It held across seasons and across years and across the distance between a porch in the autumn light and a room behind falling water. It held because both ends kept their part. The woman gave heat to the stone. The stone gave heat to the woman. The old man gave presents to the Thursday visits. The Thursday visits gave presents back to the old man. Stone does not die. Stone just waits. And people do the same. If you are patient enough, if you are brave enough to light the fire, if you are courageous enough to let the stone teach you how to hold warmth. I am 73. Ella is 34. 3 miles between us. And the connection between us is as strong as any connection I have ever had. Not because we share blood, but because we share choice. The choice to live. The choice to warm the stone. The choice to let the stone warm us back. And that in the end is all that matters.